CPAC Australia's next guest has served as Chairman of the ABC, Chairman of the ASX, Chancellor of Macquarie University, Executive Chairman of Deutsche Bank Australia and current Chairman of ADH TV. Quite a modest CV indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Dr. Maurice Newman.
Well, I avoided a Biden moment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, first I want to acknowledge Andrew Cooper and pay my respects to the CPAC team, to the ADH team that's beaming this to the United States and around the world, and for all the volunteers for having organised this wonderful conference. I think you'll agree with me, the speakers and panellists have been absolutely outstanding. And while many may characterise this as a festival of dangerous ideas, never have these conferences been so critical. I have to say before I go on that I do feel a bit like Elizabeth Taylor's seventh husband, that having listened to all of these wonderful presentations and panel discussions, I'm just wondering how I can make it interesting. But as Albert Einstein once observed, the world is a dangerous place, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. CPAC Australia is doing something, and if you value your freedoms, you must too. Time is running out. CPAC's website proclaims it is a values-based non-profit organisation that espouses the best of Howard, Reagan and Thatcher. That occurs to me, apart from John Howard, I just wonder how many young Australians know who Reagan and Thatcher were. After all, their views were far too radical for today's impressionable minds. I mean, it seems like ideals of individual liberty, personal responsibility, property rights, smaller government and lower taxes, these are now considered far too extreme and dangerous ideas, right? But then who knew, after 450 years, schools and universities in America and the United Kingdom would today find William Shakespeare's classic works triggering and promoting misogyny, racism, homophobia, classism and anti-Semitism. Now, I'm sure it won't be long before enlightened Australian teachers jump onto that bandwagon. Yet while young minds must be sheltered from Shakespeare's bigotry, it's all right to bombard them with doomsday climate change propaganda. Now, there was a recent survey that was published in Nature magazine which found 16 to 25-year-olds in 10 countries, including the United States, reported that 60% of this cohort were extremely worried about climate change. Indeed, half of them were so worried they couldn't function daily. Now, Shakespeare was never accused of that. Notwithstanding, and despite the flimsiest evidence, as you heard from Ian Plimer, this climate Armageddon propaganda is relentlessly prosecuted through the media, the schools and universities, and no critical analysis is allowed. The eminently qualified Professor Peter Ridd knows only too well about this. He was fired from James Cook University for daring to criticise flawed research foretelling the death of the barrier reef. And it's no consolation to him that 5 years on, the reef has twice as much coral as it had a decade ago. But that detail has been successfully suppressed, with only 3% of Australians knowing this. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a very dark place, and it's getting darker. When Shakespeare is a bigot, and officialdom sanctions a fable that a man could be a woman and vice versa, and the Secretary of the Department of Health takes it on notice to define what a woman is, you realise that George Orwell's 1984 was only out about 40 years. We are entering Orwell's Oceania, and we are all rapidly learning newspeak. Having successfully weaponised climate change to terrify people, corporate socialists seized upon COVID-19, a more tangible and immediate threat. Now, I have to believe that immigrants to this country who fled from tyranny must watch in despair what is happening to their adopted country. Never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined the country they chose as a refuge would practice what they sacrificed to escape. And it's not only immigrants. Most ordinary Australians would never have believed any local police force, Victorian or otherwise, would shoot rubber bullets at fleeing demonstrators who were protesting about their loss of freedoms during the world's then longest lockdowns. And nor would they have imagined that a young pregnant woman in front of her infant children could be taken away in handcuffs for daring to post on Facebook a call for people to resist their loss of liberty. Now, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews is not alone in condoning this callous behaviour. Who can forget the death of an unborn child whose New South Wales mother was in desperate need of urgent medical attention but was denied access to a Gold Coast hospital because Queensland hospitals are for Queenslanders? That was a contemptible decision at the time, and I think it remains a stain on our nation. Of course, Big Brother and increasingly Big Sister can always make exceptions for officially sanctioned causes like Black Lives Matter, the Extinction Rebellion protesters. They were all given a licence. And why Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk made an exception for actor Tom Hanks and his wife, who were known to be out and proud supporters of President Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Unfortunately, the unborn baby didn't have any of those credentials. Yet we are constantly reassured we're all in this together. And despicable though those actions were, there was no criticism from the National Cabinet or any Australian Parliament. Prime Ministers past and present gave silent consent. Business chiefs and church leaders were mute, along with academics and the mainstream media. Did it dawn to any of them that this was Australia, not Venezuela? Clearly not. I lived through the London Blitz in fear of a Hitler invasion. We were spared thanks to the courage of those who bravely fought for our freedoms and our values. That courage seems conspicuously absent at the moment. And I have long wondered why pre-war Germans remained silent about the things taking place around them, which they knew to be evil. German journalist Sebastian Haffner offers an explanation in his book, Defying Hitler. He wrote, "There are few things, quote, there are few things as odd as a calm, superior indifference with which I and those like me watched the beginnings of the Nazi revolution in Germany as if it was from a box in a theatre," close quote. He went on to say, there was not a single example of energetic defence of courage or principle. And when Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, they still had a democratic constitution. But by manipulating the democratic political system, he and other Nazi leaders used existing laws to destroy German democracy and to create a dictatorship. Laugh it off if you like, but there are parallels between Germany 1933 and Australia 2023. As Adam Crichton wrote in The Australian recently, the collective shrug when it emerged in May that the Australian government had been urging Twitter and other social media platforms to take down posts it didn't like during the pandemic, including those poking fun at Daniel Andrews, foreshadows a worrying deterioration of our freedom. And like the censorship of Peter Credlin's accurate observation that the Uluru Statement is a lot more than one page, big tech censors blanked it out, claiming false information, checked by independent fact-checkers, namely RMIT and the ABC. Both, of course, unabashed supporters of the Yes campaign. Now the government wants to formalise censorship with a proposed Australia Communications and Media Authority Misinformation Bill. It defines false, misleading or deceptive information as reasonably likely to cause harm, and it carries coercive powers. Of course, authorised content from any level of government cannot be misinformation. We know that. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the platform and the launching pad for Orwell's Ministry of Truth. And like Hitler's Germany, our history is already being rewritten. Children are being taught that since 1788, Australia has been a disgraceful example of white supremacy, imperialism, exploitation, racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. They're told it's not our country. Why would anyone defend a society built on such detestable foundations? And to plagiarise American political commentator Pat Buchanan, our society will survive only until Australia's histories and biographies are burned and new texts written to Nazify General Sir John Monash, Weary Dunlop and the rest. Once achieved, a newly indoctrinated generation of Australians will accede to the demands to tear down and destroy what their fathers cherished. It's why we are being told to atone for our sins by enshrining racial privilege in our Constitution. It doesn't matter that everywhere positive discrimination has been tried in this way for minorities. It encourages the tyranny of low expectations and bigotry. Nowhere have such measures narrowed the gap of disadvantage. Clearly, the voice is a proposal from the heart and not from the head. And despite the empirical evidence, it is promoted nonetheless. As Napoleon Bonaparte wryly observed, what is history but a fable agreed upon? We should never underestimate the ability of our enemies to highlight the shortcomings of democracy with reasons given to support more authoritarian forms of government. Indeed, the importance of a vibrant private sector to keep the powers of government under control is critical. For, as Milton Friedman warned, unchecked, government will become a Frankenstein that will destroy the very freedom we establish it to protect. Now, people may think I'm being alarmist and drawing a long bow in creating the illusion that we are sitting in Hafner's theatre box watching the beginnings of a social revolution. If you don't believe me, then watch the behaviour of the world's political and business leaders dancing to the tune of the World Economic Forum's Supremo and United Nations darling Klaus Schwab. You heard Alan Jones talk about him last night. He says artificial intelligence now gives us the ability to predict. So why do we need elections? Indeed. These days, corporate leaders concentrate on diversity, equity and inclusion. They collaborate with regulators to ensure the costs of environmental and social damage are internalised by those responsible. The mantra is profits cannot come at the expense of long-term social resilience. Profits aren't everything. Obviously, when an organisation's future is inexorably linked to one ideological side, close attention is paid to that doctrine, and it is. Ultimately, this is a foreign-driven agenda, ultimately this is a foreign-driven agenda. While we know we can't be powered by renewables, Australia is a signatory to the Paris Agreement and a member of the Zero Emissions 2050 Club. It meekly defers authority over the barrier reef to UNESCO, which is well aware of the reef's robust condition, but it still has it considering listing as in danger. Australia is also, which is unbelievable to me, contracting out or considering contracting out management of the next pandemic to the World Health Organization, which is openly corrupt. So at home and abroad, the corporate state is in command, And in Australia, the differences between Labor and Liberal are essentially at the extremes. It's a shame to me there are more Liberal Party members or members of Parliament here in this conference. So championing the corporate state are billionaires, crony capitalists, the legacy media, universities and big tech. GetUp receives funds from United States billionaire George Soros's Open Society Foundation. Environmental NGOs like the WWF, Extinction Rebellion and Greenpeace get their funding both from micro-donations but also major corporations and wealthy individuals. These are the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I joined Advance Australia's advisory board, which is a true grassroots organisation. In 5 years, I think you heard this yesterday, has grown from 0 to 275,000 supporters. So congratulations to Matthew Sheehan and Stephen Doyle for their incredible work. And it's why I support the Institute of Public Affairs, the voice of freedom, for over 80 years. Scott Hargraves and John Roscombe are keeping that flame burning brighter than ever. And it's why I also chair the ADH, which is, as I said, streaming this conference around the world, and which from a stand-up start featuring Alan Jones 4 nights a week just 20 months ago, now boasts an impressive lineup of presenters and gets 5 million unique views a month. And I also commend a little-known organisation, Ian Littler is the man who runs it, Western Heritage Australia. They're hosting a forum on mass immigration and the nation state. That's scheduled, I think, for September the 12th. All these organisations, ladies and gentlemen, need your support. And not just financial, although, of course, without finance, nothing can be done. But also by attending functions like this. And I thank you all for coming here and showing your support. So it's attending functions and defying those who seek to silence your views. So just remember, united we stand and divided we fall. And like Milton Friedman, I believe it is never too late to try to turn the tide of history in a direction which will benefit the ordinary people in our society. A society where a child born today should have a choice rather than a life of chance. Thank you.
What a magnificent address from Dr. Maurice Newman.